What is up, guys? Welcome to my review for Arrow Season 7, Episode 6, titled Due Process. The due process that this episode title is referring to has to do with Laurel trying to get Oliver out of prison, which is how the last episode ended in a pretty satisfying way, which gives hope for Oliver to get out of prison, and then this episode continued that with Laurel trying to help Oliver. So first of all, a big thing from the trailer was that Oliver was rejecting her help because he doesn't like her very much, which I went over in my trailer breakdown how that does make sense, and how Oliver, his actions make a lot of sense in this episode, and they definitely do. I think this whole storyline was more to build up Laurel as a character rather than actually help Oliver get out of prison, because obviously it didn't work. So I think that the way they went about that, I didn't like that very much, because the last episode built it up towards Oliver maybe getting out of prison, and this episode shifted that to being more of a redemption arc story for Laurel, which I like that. I like the fact that it's a redemption arc story for Laurel, but I don't like the switch from helping Oliver to being all about Laurel. But I think it wasn't that bad, and I definitely have even more hope at the end of this episode to get Oliver out of prison, or maybe the next episode after this one, because it is titled The Slab Side Redemption. But anyway, the storyline, which was not the main storyline of the episode, but it is the storyline this title is referring to, is not terrible, but it also was a little disappointing how it wasn't about Oliver and it was about Laurel. So speaking of Oliver Queen, his storyline in this episode, which is the prison storyline again, has to do very much with Stanley. He was seemingly framed for killing a guard, and then in the end it's kind of hinted at that he actually was the one to kill him, and up until the point where it's revealed that he might have been the one to kill the guard, the storyline isn't very interesting. I mean, it's not bad per se. The fact that Oliver Queen is in it makes it interesting in automatically, but outside of that, nothing really happened that I was very interested in. It is easily the worst prison storyline of the season so far, which it's not saying much, because the prison storylines have been very good this season, and this one is pretty good as well, but it is most likely the worst of the season so far. That being said, there were some parts that I did really like. They like the conversations between Oliver and Brick, and the end, like I said a little bit ago, when it was revealed that Stanley might have been the one to actually kill the guard, and who knows, maybe Stanley's actually not innocent and Bronze Tiger is the one that's innocent, because I would like to see some sort of redemption arc for Bronze Tiger. I think that would be cool. That was hinted at in a previous episode when he talked about his Suicide Squad past, and maybe it's going to be revealed that Oliver has been with somebody, or he has been friends with somebody who maybe wasn't framed for murder and he was actually guilty and he is crazy and he killed this guard. That would be such an interesting twist, because I would not see this coming until this point. I just always thought Stanley was a very innocent guy, and a very, very timid, innocent guy, and here it's hinted towards the fact that he might not be. He might be a psychotic murderer who is very good at convincing people that he is not a threat. That could be a very interesting twist they use in this episode, or in this season, mind you. So this reveal that it could be him who killed the guard, very, very interesting, and it was easily the best part of the storyline. While the storyline itself was easily the worst prison storyline yet, it still definitely was pretty good. Another thing is that I feel like Oliver Queen's role in this episode was pretty limited. I mean, he was a part of two different storylines. One of the storylines, he was only in 2 scenes, which was everything to do with Laurel, and then the one with Stanley and Oliver was pretty limited in the episode. I think that was also only 3 scenes. So this episode, very limited on Oliver Queen, and Felicity Smoak was very heavily focused on in this episode. Usually that means for a pretty bad episode if you look at Season 6 and Season 4, and really every season up until this point, most episodes that focus around Felicity Smoak as her as the main character is not a very good episode, usually a pretty bad episode at that. Just for example, episode 4 of Season 6, where Felicity was the main character of that episode, it was a very, very bad episode. Although this episode, even though she is the main character, it's not a bad episode. It doesn't ruin the episode in the slightest, and I think the reason for that is because I like the direction they're going with Felicity, to make her this darker version of herself and to make her a villain in the future, which I will go over the flash forwards of this episode in a minute. I really like that direction, because I feel like her becoming a villain kind of fits her as a character. I just think that if she was a villain, I wouldn't hate her as much, because I feel like it would be a lot easier to tolerate her at times, or at least at her worst, if the show wasn't actually telling you to root for her, and her becoming a villain would accomplish that. Hopefully, I feel like they could do that in the present day, although the future is where she really becomes the villain, or a villain in the future, and I feel like they could do that in the present day as well, and if they do, I would be pretty interested in seeing that version of Felicity over the Felicity we've seen for the last 7 seasons. So I do like the direction they're going with Felicity in this season. Who knows, maybe her becoming more evil and more dark will lead to her separation from Oliver, which I would like to see as well. I mean, who am I kidding? I would love to see that on this show. Felicity becoming a villain on the show is something I'm actually kind of interested in, so who knows, maybe that could turn out to be pretty good this season. But in this episode in particular, her being the main character definitely did not ruin the episode, and the storyline she was a part of, which was basically just Team Arrow, Argus, the SCPD, and the new Green Arrow trying to take down Diaz and the Longbow Hunters. So this storyline was all about Team Arrow, Argus, SCPD, and the new Green Arrow, first of all trying to save Anatoly, or originally it was just Team Arrow and Argus trying to save Anatoly, and I think Dinah was there as well. It was a bunch of people trying to save Anatoly, and I thought that's how the storyline would end. This episode actually turns out that's where it begins. That was kind of surprising and honestly very unexpected, because I felt like they spoiled the ending to the storyline in a previous trailer, and I'm happy to say that they didn't. They just spoiled the beginning of the storyline with them saving Anatoly and the building they're in blowing up. We already knew that was going to happen, so I'm glad that's not how it ended. I obviously will talk about how it ended in a second, because that was also very unexpected, but everything leading up to that, I thought that storyline was actually not bad. I really liked all these characters actually interacting with each other. I felt like the entire cast of the show, except for Oliver and Laurel, for the most part, were a part of this storyline, so I did enjoy that very much. Everyone on New Team Arrow, Felicity and Diggle, as well as some other characters like Anatoly, teaming up to take on the Longbow Hunters and Diaz, that was actually pretty fun to see in this episode. And when they finally do get to the Longbow Hunters and Diaz, one thing I'll say about the Longbow Hunters is that I don't think they had any speaking roles in this episode. They are, in general, not being used very well. I feel like they would have been the main villains of the season, and here they're just basically just henchmen for Diaz, who they don't even have cool costumes or anything, so it's really, really disappointing how they're using these characters. But aside from that, this whole storyline with Team Arrow, Argus, the SCPD, and the new Green Arrow fighting Diaz and the Longbow Hunters was pretty fun to watch. It wasn't amazing or anything, but it definitely was a lot of fun. Speaking of this storyline, a big thing that happened in the storyline was Anatoly Kniazev. Well, he was also a big part of the storyline, which I thought he was great in this episode. In general, he's a pretty great character, and he was also great in this episode. A big thing that happened to him was that it was confirmed that he had the name the KG Beast in the past when he was a member of the KGB. As of right now in the show, I didn't know how they would fit giving him the KG Beast name as naturally, because he was a part of the Bratva up until this point, and I feel like they would be enemies to the KG Beast. I'm not really sure. I think they probably are, so that wouldn't really work very well, but I'm so glad they gave that name to him in the past. His name in the comics is the KG Beast, and like I said, I'm so glad they gave that name to him on this show. Who knows, maybe he could become the actual KG Beast supervillain in the future, maybe get some cybernetic enhancements and get this costume and become a villain. I think he could have been a good main villain for season 6 instead of Diaz and Kaden James as the KG Beast, but we got what we got, and that's fine. But I just love the fact that they finally gave him his KG Beast name in this episode, and like I said, all of his scenes in this episode were great, like the ones with Felicity and Felicity becoming a darker version of herself. That was handled very well with Anatoly being in those scenes. Anatoly in general made this episode so much better, and I hope he comes back for future episodes, hopefully also as the KG Beast. But then this episode, or the storyline, ended in a pretty surprising way, which is that Ricardo Diaz was actually defeated by this whole Team Arrow, Argus, SCPD, and Green Arrow team, and although the Longbow Hunters did get away, Diaz was defeated and put behind bars, or he will be in prison in the next episode, which is very interesting. I do think that they could have pushed it off to the middle or the second half of the season, or they should have, if not for the crossover that gets in the way, that forces them to get Oliver out of prison by episode 9, which I do think he should be out of prison by then, but I feel like the flow of the season would have worked better if Diaz would have gotten in prison and be defeated by all these characters in the second half of the season, or maybe in the season finale, in the mid-season finale. But I get it. I get why they didn't do that, so it's not a complaint in the slightest. But what I do not like is that the Green Arrow and Diggle were so easily, or they were able to defeat Diaz so easily. I feel like Diaz himself could probably be beaten by those characters, but with the drug, I feel like he could be a little bit more threatening than he is. Who knows, maybe he lost on purpose because he wanted to get into prison, which if that's revealed, then that would be pretty awesome. But if it's not, then I do not like the fact that the Green Arrow and Diggle were able to beat him so damn easily. But other than that, I felt like the storyline was very, very good. So that brings me to the flash forwards of this episode, which I felt like were maybe not as strong as previous flash forwards episode, although that's not to say much either, because the flash forwards have been very interesting so far, and this episode is no exception. Although this episode's flash forwards I felt like were more there to explain to us what happened to Felicity and who is Felicity Smoak in the future, and to connect to the present day where Felicity is becoming a much darker version of herself, which, like I said earlier, I did like that in this episode, and I do like Felicity becoming a villain character, because if she isn't killed off in the present day, then her becoming a villain is the best alternative, because if she's dead in the future and a villain in the present day, that would honestly be the best thing they could do right now, because she can't be killed off in the present day. So anyway, these flash forwards were, like I said, maybe the weakest flash forwards of the show yet, but they were still pretty good, extremely interesting. I still am very interested in this world of the 20 years in the future. I did like scenes like where Roy shot those simulated tennis balls, or the conversation between Roy and Dinah, and the conversations between William and Zoe. Again, flash forwards were not the best in this season so far, but they were still pretty good nonetheless. So in conclusion, this episode was definitely not the strongest episode of the season so far, but everything that it set up was very interesting, like Stanley being maybe a more or less innocent person than he's letting on, Felicity becoming a villain, and Diaz going to prison in the next episode and meeting up and rematching with Oliver Queen. Again, not the best episode of the season yet, but I do like basically everything that it was setting up for the upcoming episode. So I will give this episode an 8.9 out of 10, but let me know what you thought about the episode in the comments down below. If you like this video, don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe, and thanks for watching.